So I'm trying to give people a few more minutes to slide in because they didn't give 5-minute break in between the sessions. So give people a few more minutes to do that. So while we're waiting, I'm just curious, where are people from? Portland? University of Portland or?
PCC right now.
Okay.
Community college.
Cool. Where else are people from?
Salem,
Salem?
Oregon.
Okay.
South Seattle.
Good. So,
School at CUWiP.
okay. Anybody here from the University of Idaho? Any Vandals?
One person this weekend.
Good, because as you'll find out, I did my undergraduate at U of I. So,
Are you originally from Idaho?
yeah, I actually grew up in southeastern Idaho, and then did my bachelor's at the University of Idaho, and then I came over here, did my PhD at University of Washington. Marjorie Olmsted was actually on my, she was one of my advisors on my thesis committee.
What town in Idaho?
I grew up in Idaho Falls, so yeah.
From Elko, Nevada.
Cool. Yeah. All right, now that Raphael's here, so one of the things I'm going to want you guys to do, as part of the question session at the end, I want to answer what I hope are the most common questions that you have. So I'm going to have Raphael here pass out these Post-it notes to everybody. I'll let you guys start here in the front. If you could do me the favor of just writing down just one, the question that you have that is the one that worries you the most about finding a job, and then Raphael is going to collect them. And then if there's any themes, if people have the same question, I'd like to answer those first, right? So that's the main idea. So we get the ones that are the most common questions. That's the idea. And at the end of that time, if there's still more questions that I haven't got to, that's fine. So just if you write those down, we'll get to them. Okay. So let's. Everybody get one? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started then. So as I said, I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Idaho. So I graduated in 1987 with degrees in mathematics and physics from the University of Idaho. I really always considered myself a physicist, but when I was going to school and I realized that after I took all the classes in math that I wanted to take, that it would take me a total of 2 more courses to get a bachelor's degree in math too. Hey, it worked fine for me. So, plus I ended up getting a scholarship, which there wasn't a lot of money in physics department there, but there was a math scholarship, so that was kind of nice. So I found optics in condensed matter physics, but I really thought at the time I wanted to go into astronomy. I also met my wife when we were undergraduates there. We actually got married when we were juniors, and we both wanted to go to graduate school. The question is then, where do you want to go to school with your partner? And that's a thing, right? If you've decided you want to make a lifetime commitment to each other, where do you want to go? And we ended up choosing the University of Washington because it was the best school that both of us got into. And so we got here in '88 and have never left. So be able to do that. So as I said, I did my PhD in physics. Sam Fain was my undergraduate advisor. I actually helped move into this building. That all happened in the I guess it was about '93, something like that. So we actually moved into the physics and astronomy building, and spent my time here doing research, and also spent a lot of time working with the physics ed group here, which was really, really good. And that helped me to learn how to speak. It helped me to learn how to teach physics, and it also helped me to do something else, which you'll find out on the next slide, because at the end of this, I always say that there's kind of 2 different kinds of people who get PhDs in physics. One kind is really, really smart, and the other kind is too stupid to know when to quit. I'm category 2, okay? So I realized at the end of that time that I really didn't want to do academic career track physics, and then it becomes a question of, what do you want to do? So what happened for me is that I had to get a job, and the first thing that I landed out of school was a job as an applications engineer at Microstar Laboratories in Bellevue, which is just across Lake Washington here. And I was a data acquisition specialist and applications engineer, and one of the things that really helped me to get a job was that bit about where I was teaching at the physics ed group. That really helped because they wanted to hire somebody that could help do training sessions for customers' employees. And so I ended up leading that whole effort. We would teach these 1-week courses for people who wanted to come and learn about data acquisition and all the things that you could do with these custom boards. And while I was there, I helped to recruit a couple of other physicists, and that was kind of the start on this idea of me helping to hire physicists over the course of my career. And I think you'll find that I have, because of these experiences, that I have some good ideas about how to tell people what to do when they're applying for jobs, and we'll get to that in a minute. After I left MicroStar, I went to a company that actually I'd done some of this custom programming work for. It was a company called Index Sensors and Controls, and they were based in Redmond at the time. I knew when they hired me that they were going to move up to Stanwood because it was too expensive to build a manufacturing facility in Redmond, which of course is even more so now than that was true then. But basically I was working on embedded control systems. So I was just working on these same things that I learned at Index, and it was this idea that you can, your first job is not the only job that you'll have, right? So you learn skills and you move on to the next thing. So I was there for a while. I used simple microcontrollers that were 8-bit microcontrollers. I still can remember that the first one that I ever used, I had an 8-bit microcontroller that had 72 bytes of ROM and I think 8 bytes of RAM. And I had to program that into a programmable temperature control switch. So that was kind of interesting. It was all done in machine code because of course you can't fit something like Linux on something that small. So anyway, that was kind of a kick. But that company was starting to feel the effects of the dot-com bust. And so that led me to try and find another gig. And I took that knowledge that I gained as doing embedded systems control, and I worked as an embedded software engineer for a startup here in Seattle called Intelligent Ion. And that was building mass spectrometers. So it's again this idea that, hey, I have a degree in physics, I do a lot of embedded control systems, and so I've worked my way up then to do the next thing, which was this embedded microcontroller system. But instead of an 8-bit microcontroller, it was 32-bit microcontroller, and I got to do more interesting programming with that. On the other hand, the one thing about Intelligent Ion was that it was a startup, and it did what most startups do, and it died about a year after I got there. The company that had invested in it in the first round of financing offered 4 of the 11 of us jobs, and I was one of those people who was fortunate enough to be offered a job. The only thing was that they said, yeah, we'll let you live in Seattle for 6 months. After that, we're probably going to move everybody to Alabama, which is where their headquarters were. I really didn't have any interest in moving to Alabama. Certainly my wife didn't, and neither did my kids, so we started looking for more work. And that led to what I do now, which is I am the Senior Manager of Systems Design Engineering at the Allen Institute for Brain Science. And what we do is we now work on instrumentation for high throughput work doing neurophysiology research systems. And we work on instrumentation design holistically. So you can see that I've gone from these simple startup jobs all the way up to the point where I'm now working on big instruments. And I want to show you a few examples of that. All right, so this system here, let's see, I guess it's not, my pointer's not showing on the thing. Let me just point to the system. So the system on the top left is actually a unit that is set up to be able to acquire data from looking at mice. That system can look at 12 channels of electrophysiology data at once, and we can then compare signals between different cells as they fire. So you would generate a stimulus in a slice of mouse tissue, and then you can actually record which cells are connected to what. So it's really an idea of trying to understand which cells are connected to each other, which is part of trying to understand how the brain works, right? The system on the top right is our electron microscopy lab. So this is our really high throughput data acquisition imaging lab, where we are actually just finished imaging a cubic millimeter of tissue for the mouse brain. To give you an idea of what that really means, that is the largest amount of electrophysiology data ever collected on the brain tissue in the world. And that is somewhere around 2 petabytes of data, of raw image data. So there's megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes is the next level, right, beyond that. And we did that in 3 months. There's 6 of those electron microscopes, and our team developed the instrumentation to be able to make those things run round the clock. And so they run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we, imaging section after section after section of mouse brain data repeatedly as we spool them in off of a tape. The system on the bottom left is one of our 2-photon imaging rigs. So this is using optics that would generate a high intensity laser beam pulse that goes at about 80 megahertz pulse, and it's really, really, really bright for that really short amount of time. They're typically about 100 femtoseconds long, and so they're really fast optics to be able to do this, but you can actually, with using this system, you can actually watch the neurons in a mouse's brain fire as we show them a movie. So we actually have these mice watch movies that are intentionally set up to try and make different parts of their visual system respond, and then we can actually see, on a millisecond level time scale, how each of these neurons responds to each other. So the idea here is that on the top systems, we've got things that are doing identification of, kind of how the different types of cells are connected and what types of cells they are. And the system on the bottom left is kind of the next level up, which is a system that's then trying to understand how they actually respond. It's a system, things called systems neuroscience, and we're trying to understand essentially how the visual cortex of the brain processes information. The system on the bottom right is what we call, that's our shotgun tomography lab. So this is a system that is really set up to kind of complement the electron microscope system on the top, where it stains cells on a very sparse basis, because they're so jumbled together that it's really hard to connect. But this allows us to kind of see the connections more easily to be able to do that. Those are just a few of the examples that we are doing here. To give you an idea of the scale of these things, the system on the top left costs about $300,000. The lab on the top right costs about $3 million. The system on the bottom left, we have 6 of those microscopes, and those are each about $500,000 each. And the system on the bottom right, I think that was about $200,000. So my group actually is in charge of building all these things. So I get to spend money, and I like to do that. So, and I get to play with really cool toys, which is a fun job to have. All right, so that's enough about me. Let me talk to you about what it is that I think you all came to know. That is to say, how do I get a freaking job to begin with, right? So that's a really hard thing to answer that question, especially when you're, just as an undergraduate or in community college, and you're just trying to say, what do I want to do? So I always like to start this off into 5 different steps. So step number 1 is to identify companies that you might want to work for. So what you really are looking for is asking the question of, what is it that I like to do, right? So that's a question that is particular to everyone. I don't know what you want to do. What you want to do is not necessarily the same thing as that I want to do or what each other wants to do, and that's fine. You really have to identify what kind of job do I want, and then you should find the companies that do that kind of work, right? So that sounds straightforward, but that also means it's doing a lot of research, because a lot of times you don't know, right? But it's something you should really think about. And it's also true that you might think of several different things, and that's also fine. You don't have to say, I only want one thing, right? If you know exactly what you want to do, that's great, but if you say, I could do this, or I could do that, or I could do some other thing, that's also fine, right? You just need to really kind of get to the idea of, trying to choose a couple of things, because you can't do everything, right? Then obviously, the next step is this application process, the resume and the cover letter, and we'll get to the details on that in a minute. Then beyond that, there's phone screens, and there can be several levels of that, and we'll go through that as well. Interviews, it's not uncommon to be more than one of them. And then finally, repeat this in parallel. And the reason for that is because it can easily take 12 to 18 months for you to find the job that's right for you, right? So even if you are pretty confident that you know what you want to do and are pretty well qualified, jobs don't just happen. So you should not be discouraged if it takes some time, because it will, right? So you should not think, okay, this is it. I've got this company. Because what happens is it's likely that, well, maybe you got your resume in and maybe you got a phone call, but they decided that you were not one of their top 3 candidates they're going to bring in for an in-person interview. Or maybe you did and get that far, but they hired somebody else. And that will happen, right? If you're one of the top 3 candidates, the chances that you get a job are obviously 1 in 3, right? So don't just bank on one thing. You should do this in parallel. Just keep irons in the fire all the time, right? Okay, so that's really important to not just think, in a linear progress. This should be a parallel job search. Okay, so let's go through each of those steps in more detail. Looking for a company. Like I say, the most important thing is know what you want to do with your career and apply for positions that match that. Don't apply for jobs that you don't want, because that's just going to make you unhappy, and you probably won't get it anyway, to be honest. It's a waste of their time, it's a waste of your time. So only look for jobs that are like, yeah, this is the kind of thing that I want. That's really what you're trying to aim for, right? There's the obvious things of like, how do you find those people? The most important thing that I can give you is the advice is to network. And that's an easy thing to say. It's really hard to do, right? Particularly if you're like me and you're an introvert and don't like to talk to people, right? I don't make close friends that easily. And that's true for a lot of physicists I know. Not everyone, of course, because we're all different. But if you do know anybody inside the company, use that to your advantage, right? It is a huge benefit to being able to see your resume seen, right? There's nothing like being able to say, hey, could you show this to the hiring manager? Because they will, right? If you've got a friend to be able to do that, if you've got a relative to be able to do that. My son got his job mostly because my wife knew somebody, right? That happened, right? That's absolutely the way it worked. And so he's now an analyst over in Redmond at a financial consulting firm and loves his job, right? But he wouldn't have necessarily even got his job seen if it hadn't been for that. You should obviously use LinkedIn. LinkedIn's one of those great networking things where it's like, I know people and you know people and maybe we know somebody through a second hand and you can talk to people that way. So use that kind of a thing as a way to do that. Family contacts, friends. If you've got a friend that had a job or know somebody, use whatever method you have to be able to actually talk to an individual to be able to do that. The second thing is really important advice, and this is particularly for people who are new to the job search market. Do not flood your resume everywhere, right? Employers can see if you've applied for 23 jobs at the same place. If you apply to a job at the Allen Institute, I can see that you applied for every one of the positions you had on the list, as would anybody at Amazon or any of the other companies around. And they'll be able to see that, and it's like, oh, yeah, you really don't want that job, you want any job. And that will knock you down in the eyes of the hiring manager. So only apply for jobs that's like, I really want that one, right? Be very particular about it when you're trying to do that. So the important thing is choose quality over quantity, right? And that's the message that I'm going to give you more than anything else about how to do that. So let's talk about the next step in the process, and which is to say your resume. Okay? Your resume should be tailored for every job you apply for, right? That is to say, you can have a 3 or 4 page resume that you're going to take out the different pieces that you have on the job application thing, and you say, okay, here's the bits that I actually want for that job, so I can get it down to a page and a half or 2. The 1 page limit that sometimes people will tell you, that's nonsense. 2 pages is fine. I don't care if it's 2 pages. I don't need to see 10 pages, but if you can get it down to 2 pages, that's fine, right? When I'm screening through resumes, okay? The important thing, particularly for people who are coming out with a degree in physics, is you will probably notice if you were to look in the want ads, there I'm showing my age. If you look on Indeed or various other places, there's a lot of things that don't just say, hey, this is a job for physicists. There are some, they're not zero, right? There's a lot of jobs, though, that say or equivalent experience. And that's where I think that you guys have as good a shot as anybody, because I think that really what you're trying to do, if I'm hiring somebody, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for skills, right? I don't really look at what somebody's degree's in that much. I'm really looking for, are the skills that you have a match for the job that I need to hire somebody for, okay? And that's going to be true for anybody, right? So what you really want to do is not an education-based resume where you're very proud of the degree that you've got, which is fine, you should be, but that's not the most important thing to your employer, so you should not put that first. It should be at the bottom of the list. It's a necessary stuff, but the thing that you want at the top of your resume are the skills. Things to include: analytical skills. Physics education is great for being able to do things, right? If you can solve Schrodinger's equation, if you understand oscillations, all that kind of stuff, that's fine. That's not what people are going to hire you for. What they want to know is that you know how to solve problems, right? And so problem-solving skills as a physicist we're some of the best people at being able to do that kind of stuff. So emphasize the fact that you're really good at solving problems, right? If you have software languages, like I listed up here, C++ or Python, whatever, I don't really care what the list is, list them, right? And if you're fluent in any of those languages, if you've done coursework in any of that kind of stuff, you don't necessarily list the course, but you just say, yeah, I speak fluent Python, I can do all that kind of stuff. That's fine. If you have instrumentation skills, like I said, optics, lasers, whatever, that kind of stuff, or if you're good at, if you've done a little project to do layout of a circuit board, right? Those are all skills that employers will want to hire you to be able to do that kind of stuff. Technical skills, if you're good at soldering, particularly there's a lot of community colleges that have courses that you can actually learn about how to do soldering. And if that's what you want to do, you should list that as this is a skill I have to be able to do that, because people actually need to have employees that do that kind of work. The other thing to do is the next thing on your list after the skills should be the experiences, right? And you should always list the most important experiences first. And I don't really care what order they are in. What I really want to know is what's the important stuff, right? So don't necessarily go by year of, I did this and then I did that and then I did something else. You should list them as saying, for this job that I'm applying for, I think that these experiences that I have are the most important ones. Because if you get to the point where somebody's actually going to read that far down your resume, because if I get 40 or 50 resumes, I may not, it doesn't look like you have the right skills, you may not even make it this far. But if you get there, you want to continue to make them read. And so always the most important stuff goes first. So experiences are important. Whether it's a senior project, an internship, a summer job, all those things are better. And the most important ones are first. I would also, by all means, if you don't have something that seems particularly relevant, still put something there, right? You must have had some kind of summer job. You must have, I'd rather hire somebody who had a job, bagging groceries, if I'm hiring somebody, and if that's the best you got, put that in. I'd rather see that than nothing, right? So always have something there, but the most important ones should go first, right? Things that you shouldn't include, your class list. Nobody cares, right? You've got a degree, you're being hired to do a job, not to attend school. If you want to apply to graduate school, that's not true. This is for people who want to actually go and get work as a job. So nobody's going to look at your class list and say, oh, okay, this person had E&M. Great. I think it's great, but that doesn't mean that it's relevant to anything I want to hire, right? Be able to do that. Also, I would not ever put your GPA on unless it's at least a 3.7, right? Frankly, if you put down that you graduated with a 2.8 GPA, you're not going to get the job. It's only going to discourage people from hiring you, right? So just unless you've got at least a 3.7, don't even mention. And even if you do have a 3.7, it doesn't matter, right? So be able to do that. Okay. All right. So the other important part when you're applying for a job is the cover letter. When you apply for the cover letter, it is absolutely critical that you need to do this. And I got the meme up there on the top left about the cover letter required. Well, I didn't want that job anyway, right? If you don't have a cover letter, you don't really want the job. That's the sign of somebody who's just flooding the racket. I'm going to apply for the 1,000 things that I can see on Indeed and hope I get a call back on some of them, right? Don't be the spam person, right? We already get too many spam emails already, right? So tailor it to the specific position. There's two things that are the important parts that you have to do that. One, research the company before you apply. What does that company do? How do they make money, right? You should know all of their ins and outs of what is it that company does, right? So remember that the company is hiring you to be part of them. So the more you understand about that company, the more likely you are to gain access to it. So you should look and understand that the hiring manager is hiring you to do a job, but the more you can then say that, hey, I appreciate these are the company values, these are the things that this company does, what does the company want to do? And in particular, for big companies, you might want to even focus it down to the group, right? So try and find out as much as you can. Google is your friend, right? If you don't spend an hour Googling all kinds of information about this company and all the kind of things that group wants to do, you've missed an opportunity to be able to do that. Then the second thing that's important is you should match your cover letter to the job requirements. Job requirements are always on the list. You should make sure that in the cover letter, you should say, oh, I see that you wanted this experience in optics. Well, I have this, right? I see that you wanted that in soldering. Well, I can do this. And those are the things that you need to be able to do. So it should be a one-to-one correspondence or one-to-many correspondence for any of those sorts of things that are on the list, right? So make sure that you tailor it to your job requirements, okay? The real big message there is the one I put at the bottom. Know your audience. Remember, you're not writing for your mom. You're not writing, unless your mom's trying to hire you, right? But you're writing for the hiring manager, right? What does the hiring manager want? So why should the hiring manager consider you? So remember who it is that you're writing for, right? It's the same as any English essay that you've ever written. Know your audience. Who is it that I'm writing for? Okay, phone interviews, okay? I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to somebody on the phone and they try and sell me on a job that's not the one I'm trying to hire for, right? So what you really need to do is what it is that that person is actually, it's again, who's the hiring manager, what are they trying to hire you for, right? So it's again, let's presume that you got all the way through the resume. You've already probably at this point made the top 10 list if you're getting a phone screen, right? So what you really should do is spend 2 to 3 more hours, right? That much time, really, seriously. Find as much time as you can to before you actually talk to somebody on the phone. Research everything you know about the company. If you'll have a name, right? You can Google that name, Google the name of the company, all that kind of information. Try and find out as much stuff as you can about that person, about that job. You can talk to, look on Glassdoor, look at all kinds of different pieces of information to try and find out as much as you can about that person, that job, that company, to be able to go through there. You should also be able to list, a lot of canned interview questions, because there are a lot of hiring managers that are kind of lazy, and so they will look up, good interview questions on the web. Well, you can do the same, and you should have a good answer for everyone that they could possibly ask, right? So, I mean, that's simple, but you'd be amazed at the number of times that people don't do it, right? And so, the answers that you should, the old, what's your strengths, what's your biggest weakness, all that kind of stuff. You should have good answers for those things, right? And don't be too cheesy about such them either, right? Well, my biggest weakness is that I work too hard. Well, come on, really, right? I'm not buying it, neither will anybody else, right? So, but have something that's like, yeah, there's things that I could work on, but they shouldn't be really important, or else they're on the list. But be somewhat sincere about trying to answer them honestly. Another really important thing when you get to a phone interview question: ask engaging questions, right? You should have a lot of questions from your research, right? You've done all this work to try and find out most of that you can about the company. You should have a bunch of questions about this company and what is it they do. Why is it that this job is important in the company scheme of things? What does the division do that you're getting moved into, right? What is it that makes them money if it's not obvious? It's not just like what will make me successful in that position. No, it's what makes the company successful. Remember, that's who it is that you're applying to, is the company, right? It's not about you. It should be about the company, right? The company that you're trying to apply for that's the people that they want to hire for that. They need you to match them rather than the other way around. Does that make sense? Okay. Engage. That's another important thing. Again, you want to be polite and you don't want to interrupt people, but you want to be excited, be positive, be forthright about answering the questions as best you can. But you also want to ask questions. There's particularly, I think, for women, this can sometimes be very intimidating, and it doesn't need to be, right? When I've interviewed women on the phone, there's some that are really good about engaging, and there's others that are not. And I guess the same's true for some men too, but it's important to engage. Don't just sit there and only answer questions when you're asked. You really need to engage and take part. This is an active, it should be a conversation. If it's not a conversation, you're losing an opportunity, right? And like I said, be polite. This goes a long way in all endeavors, right? And be positive, right? Be excited about the opportunity, but be very, very positive about what you can do. Okay, let's presume you get to the next step, which is to say, now I've actually got a chance to talk to somebody and hear what they have to say. Again, you should have a detailed plan. This is what you've probably hopefully got the whole idea. You want to know everything you can about everybody you're going to talk to before you walk in the door, right? So whoever it is that's scheduling the interview, you can talk to them. You can ask them questions. Maybe it's an email back and forth to be able to say, hey, who's on the interviewing team, right? Find out if you know who the HR contact. Just say, who am I meeting with, right? So you get in, and what are their job titles? What do they do, right? Those are fair questions before you ever go in the game. And then once you find that information, hey, again, Google's your friend. Know as much as you can about them, right? Stalk them. You need to know everything you can about them, right? So that the most that you just anything that you know what is going to turn them into, hey, what is this person going to want, right? You should know as much as you can. Now, you may not know everything, and there's always the significant likelihood, to be honest, that somebody's going to be in a meeting and they substituted somebody else in. Well, it'll happen, right? So just roll with the punches if that happens. But do as much as you can to try and say and do research ahead of time. It's impressive to people who are trying to hire that you've done that work. It shows that you care, right? So there's nothing more important than showing that you care, and this is stuff that nobody else does, right? So this is a way to really make it from, I got that one chance in 3 to, oh, you're the one, right? Clearly you care more than anybody else did. Okay. There are times when you're going to be asked to do some sort of skills test, whether it's, hey, I'll give you an example of one of the hiring managers that I worked with, and she's hiring for people who work in the wet lab in the biology groups that we have here. And so what she really wants to know isn't so much whether or not you have the skills to be able to pipette something out of one tube and stick it into another. What she really wants to know is whether or not you can describe how to do it to somebody else. So she says, okay, give me some directions, write me up on the whiteboard how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? What she's really looking for there is your ability to give clear direction, right? So you think about what, you say, okay, I'd happily do that. What is it you're asking me to do that for so that I can try and do the best job? You can ask those sorts of questions. Don't just dig into it, right, if you get surprised with something like that. There's other times which are, hey, I want to know how well you can code in Python, so we're going to have a Python coding test because that's what this job's about. Well, by all means, if you don't spend 10 hours boning up on your Python and making sure you really got it, you're, again, missing an opportunity, right? So make sure that if you know there's going to be a skills test that you're prepared for it. Practice, right? You can talk to, have your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whoever talk to you and let them pretend to be the hiring manager, right? Have your mom do that, your dad. I don't really care who it is. Practice. Find somebody that is good at being able to be that person that will pretend to be your hiring manager and ask you that kind of questions, right? Dress for success. I don't think this is usually a problem, but I've seen it be a problem for some people. You should always show up in professional attire. You should be better dressed than anybody else in the room, right? That doesn't mean you're going to if you get the job, that doesn't mean you have to dress that way the next day, right? But when you're actually doing an interview, show up in really nice professional attire with the expectation that you care. It shows that you care, right? To be able to do that. You should show up about 10 to 15 minutes early. Don't show up late because that's really bad form. But also don't show up early because I can tell you that our interview sessions, they typically last for about 4 hours. People got meetings. People got other things to do. So if you show up 45 minutes early, I don't have time for that. You're going to have to wait until we're ready. Right? So show up about 10 to 15 minutes early and be ready to sit there for that 10 to 15 minutes, and that's fine. But you don't want to sit there an hour early and stew on it, because you're just going to sit in the lobby waiting for somebody. It's not that they don't care, but they're busy. Other people have jobs too, and typically what they're really saying is that I got so much work that I can't get it done that I have to hire somebody, right? So remember, that's about the right time to do. Again, same thing as I've said before on every one of these things. Ask questions and engage, right? Make this a conversation. You should talk to everybody on the team. Find out what it is that they think is important. What's your view of the company? How does the team work, right? What is the day-to-day engagement of things, right? And again, the more positive you can be in these questions, the better, right? You should always be positive. That's the number one thing that I can give you in terms of just your attitude about that. Okay. All right. So now's the time for questions. So, Raphael, you got a couple of. Okay.
This is like the biggest.
The biggest stack? Okay, so if there's others in. Okay. All right, so I just, like I said, I had asked him to kind of sort through to give the ones that were the most common. So if you have more, then we'll go through theirs. Okay, so for someone who's not going to graduate school, what is your best advice for getting a job when others are more qualified? Attitude, right? I think I've tried to answer that question. The qualifications that you have are enough to get you, it's going to be hard to get past when you get to the phone screen without having enough qualifications. If you don't have the qualifications to get something, it's hard to get there. So you're probably applying for the wrong job if that's the case, right? You don't apply for jobs that there's no way you're going to get, right? You're just wasting everybody's time, including yours mostly, right? So if you really want that kind of a job, what you should say is, okay, what kind of experience do I need to get that kind of a job, right? Let's get that. So you should do that. But if you get to the point where you say, okay, look, there's a lot of people with my same experience, but I managed to land because I did a fantastic resume and I did the right skills test and all that kind of stuff, then it becomes very much a question about attitude and engagement. And that's what I've tried to give you those pieces of advice about doing the research ahead of time and knowing all kinds of questions to ask. Does that help answer those questions, or any follow-up on that? Okay. All right, question set number 2 here. How do I know what I'm really qualified for, and how far out of my comfort, I'm sorry, I can't read very well, should I look? How qualified are you? Oh, so let's think about this. That's hard question to answer. So let me just try this. What you're really qualified for is something that you know you can just do, right? But that's hard to do that when you're straight out of school, right? So what I would say that when I'm hiring somebody straight out of school, I basically don't expect them to know anything, right? So does that helps, right? I don't expect people to know what we do. I don't expect people to know what sort of specific details that we're going to do when I talk about electrophysiology or two-photon optics. I mean, the last physicist I hired, last fall he came from the UW, he was a bachelor's degree here, and, he was just raw as they came, right? And I had, knew nothing, and that's fine, but he, had the right attitude and be able to do that. So there's, that was kind of the thing I would say. That was not a very good answer, but I tried to give that answer. Is that any follow-up on that question? Yeah.
Could you say in the interview that you're ready and willing to learn and give an example of that? Have you done that?
Yeah. What I would say that you're excited for the opportunity to learn. So it's to be able to do it that way. It's again be positive in the way that you would do that. So it's not so much just ready and willing. Be very positive about the way you're saying. You're excited for the opportunity to pursue this knowledge, right? The chances that you're hiring, and almost independent of what job you're applying for, very few people actually know exactly the skills that you're going to do there. You're going to spend the first 3 months learning what do they do. That's fine. So be able to do that. It's mostly the attitude. If you get to that point, it's really very much more about attitude. All right. This one here. What do you look for in others with regard to references, and what are good questions for a hiring manager? So with regard to references, this is an interesting question. From the point of view of if you're asking somebody to be a reference for you, there are some people who will give good references and there's some people who won't. And so I think that I find very little use in asking references except for in very limited cases where I'm just not sure about somebody. Most of the times because the answers that you're going to get from somebody who asks for references are canned, oh yeah, this person's great. Well, everybody says they're great or else they wouldn't have asked. So I don't usually check references except for, if in certain circumstances where I want to know, hey, I just want to understand what this person's role on a project was, right? How did this person actually do on that? Be able to go that. The other half of this was, what are good questions for a hiring manager? So I think the main thing that I want to do is mostly just to see what it is that you are trying, show that you're engaging, right? So that particularly with regard to team success, right? So if anybody who asks me questions about how my team succeeds as opposed to how they succeed, that's a win, right? So it's mostly remembering that it's not about you, it's about the team that you're being hired in to do, right? So that's the kind of thing that I want to know more is you're interested in the team. Okay, we'll go from there. Okay. All right. How can you make your application stand out? That one's a hard one in the these days now when everybody's applying online to be able to do that. There's certain things that I hope should be obvious, and I didn't even say them. Things like, you should never have a spelling error. Your You should not only spell check your work. If English is not your first language, you should have somebody who is an expert reader, writer, double check to make sure everything's right. Go over everything like that with a fine-tooth comb, so those should be obvious. If you've got pictures of, not you, because that actually, from a legal standpoint, that's actually not allowed. As a hiring manager, we're not allowed to try and make any sort of decision on hiring somebody, whether male, female. All those are completely illegal, right? So I don't want to see anybody's picture because that might, have a perception of having something there. But if you've got work that you've worked on, it's like, hey, look, this is something that I did of my senior project. That's interesting. That's something that nobody does. So things like that are kind of different to be able to go from there. Okay. What keywords to look for to be a field researcher or physicist for a big company? I think that depends on the company and what it is that you do, right? So, for example, let's say, for example, you are interested in being a field applications engineer for a liquid handling robot company. I say this because I'm in the middle of buying a liquid handling robot right now. So it's about, these are instruments that cost anywhere between 80 and 300 grand, and they can be, big systems of a lot of robotics to be able to do that. So you just try and look and see, okay, well, what is it that they do? And so if I could say I've had these kind of experiences, or if you're looking at saying, hey, look, there's a company that does lasers, well, you look for people that do optics and say things like that. So it just really depends on the company, right? So I can't say that there's a generic thing that would make you stand out. Amazon, if you're applying for a job at Amazon, it depends on what you're doing at Amazon, right? I know one of the problems, and I've lost people to go work for Amazon that are working on the drone program. We just had a mechanical engineer that left to do that. We've had other people that are really into the last mile delivery, which is a big problem that they have from there. Right? So they're trying to understand what it is that those guys are trying to do. And so you say, look, it's again, tailor it to the job, right? That's why I was trying to go through the knowing what it is that every resume should be specific to that job. You might have an Uber resume that you cut down to that. But that and the cover letter should always put that together. Okay. Okay, I've been out of the workforce for a while, and I'm over 30. How can I show on paper what a hard worker I am when most of my contacts and references are a decade old? I don't really care if you've been out of the work for a while. You should show that you're there. Women who have had kids and are coming back to the workforce, that's fine. It's another one of those things that's illegal to discriminate somebody on the basis of somebody's age or on the basis of the fact they have kids, right? So that should not be a concern. I'm not saying that there aren't people who make it that way, but certainly I don't, and I don't really care. Mostly, I think it's what you've done. If you want to come back into the workforce, it's always helpful. I guess if you're worried about your skills are out of date, that's a different question, right? So if you're working on programming, you should maybe take another class or an online certificate program or something like that. Those are the sorts of things that can do that. And it's again, start low, right? You don't have to, start off with a top-end job of like, okay, I want that job, but well, okay, if I can't get that, how do I get the one that would lead to that, right? So I said that you work your way up through the progression. Your first job is not your only job. It's going to be working your way up. Okay. Community is extremely important to me. How can I tell what kind of a community the company has without working here first? Excellent question. It's also one that's really important to me. So I think that's a good thing to be worried about. And my answer to that question is ask, right? Ask the HR person, ask the hiring manager. If you get to the interview point, ask everybody on the interview team. Say, what's it like to work here, right? I'm excited to do these things, but do people hang out together? Do they, go out for beer? They go hiking on the weekends together. Do you guys see each other once at work, and then that's the last thing you want to know? Well, so just ask, right? Like I said, those are the sort of engagement questions that I think are really good to ask. Okay. Do you have to know someone to get an interview? The answer is no, right? You don't have to, it just helps. So the question of, engagement that way, it's always just a question of, hey, if I know somebody, then I have a better chance. But, of the jobs that I've got, the one that I can say that I definitely knew somebody was the one where I got hired by a company that I'd already done some work for as a contractor, right? So there's lots of other things where, you know, I just applied for an ad and I got it in. But it's a lot easier if you know somebody or something like that. Okay, I think my time's running out. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to talk, and I'll also be giving the same talk again at 11. Anyway, thank you very much. So.